Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Monday, and welcome back for day 12 of Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Hope you had a fantastic weekend. We left Harry up in the air, dodging a whole bunch of bludgers. So let's see how it goes. All right, there, Scarhead, yelled Malfoy, shooting underneath him as though to show off the speed of his broom. Harry had no time to reply. At that very moment, a heavy black bludger came pelting towards him. He avoided it so narrowly that he felt it ruffle his hair as he passed. Close one, Harry, said George, streaking past him with his club in one hand, ready to knock the bludger back towards the Slytherin. Harry saw George give the bludger a powerful whack in the direction of Adrian Pusey, but the bludger changed direction in midair and shot straight for Harry again. Harry dropped quickly to avoid it, and George managed to hit it hard towards Malfoy. Once again, the bludger swerved like a boomerang and shot at Harry's head. Harry put on a burst of speed and zoomed towards the other end of the pitch. He could hear the bludger whistling along behind him. What was going on? Bludgers never concentrated on one player like this. It was their job to try and unseat as many people as possible. Fred Weasley was waiting for the bludger at the other end. Harry ducked as Fred swung at the bludger with all of his might. The bludger was knocked off course. Gotcha, Fred yelled happily, but he was wrong. As though it was magnetically attracted to Harry, the bludger pelted after him once more, and Harry was forced to fly off at full speed. It had started to rain. Harry felt heavy drops fall on his face, splattering onto his glasses. He didn't have a clue what was going on in the rest of the game until he heard Lee Jordan, who was commentating, saying, Slytherin lead, 60 points to 0. The Slytherin's superior brooms were clearly doing their jobs, and meanwhile the mad bludger was doing all it could to knock Harry out of the air. Fred and George were flying so close to him on either side that Harry could see nothing at all except their flailing arms, and had no chance to look for the snitch, let alone catch it. Someone's tampered with this bludger, Fred grunted, swinging his bat with all his might as it launched a new attack on Harry. We need time out, said George, trying to signal to Wood and stop the bludger breaking Harry's nose at the same time. Wood had obviously got the message. Madam Hooch's whistle rang out, and Harry, Fred, George dived for the ground, still trying to avoid the mad bludger. What's going on? Said Wood as the Gryffindor team huddled together while Slytherins in the crowd jeered. We're being flattened, Fred. George, where were you when that bludger stopped Angelina scoring? We were 20 feet above her, stopping the other bludger from murdering Harry, Oliver, said George angrily. Somebody's fixed it, and it won't leave Harry alone. It isn't gone for anything else all game. The Slytherins must have done something to it. But the bludgers have been locked in Madam Hooch's office since our last practice, and there was nothing wrong with them then, said Wood anxiously. Madam Hooch was walking towards them. Over his shoulder, Harry could see the Slytherin team jeering and pointing in his direction. Listen, said Harry, as she came nearer and nearer. With you two flying around me all the time, the only way I'm going to catch the snitch is if it flies up my sleeve. Go back to the rest of the team and let me deal with the rogue one. Don't be thick, said Fred. It will take your head off. Wood was looking from Harry to the Weasleys. Oliver, this is insane, said Alicia Spinnet angrily. Can't let Harry deal with this thing all on his own. Let's ask for an inquiry. If we stop now, we'll have to forfeit the match, said Harry, and we're not losing a Slytherin just because of a crazy bludger. Come on, Oliver, tell them to leave me alone. This is all your fault, George said angrily to Wood. Get the snitch or die trying. That's the stupid thing to tell him. Madam Hooch had joined them. Ready to resume play? She asked Wood. Wood looked at the determined look on Harry's face. All right, he said. Fred, George, you heard Harry. Leave him alone and let him deal with the bludger on his own. The rain was falling more heavily now. On Madam Hooch's whistle, Harry kicked off hard from into the air and heard the telltale whoosh of the bludger behind him. Higher and higher Harry climbed. He looped and swooped and spiraled and zigzagged and rolled, slightly dizzy. He nevertheless kept his eyes wide open. Rain was specking his glasses and ran up his nostrils as he hung upside down, avoiding another fierce dive from the bludger. He could hear laughter from the crowd. He knew he must look very stupid, but the rogue bludger was heavy and couldn't change direction as quickly as Harry could. He began the kind of roller coaster ride around the edges of the stadium, squinting through the silver sheets of rain to the Gryffindor goalpost where Adrian Pusey was trying to get past Wood. A whistling in Harry's ear told him the bludger had just missed him again. He turned right over and sped in the opposite direction. Training for the ballet, Potter, yelled Malfoy as Harry was forced to do a stupid kind of twirl in midair to dodge the bludger. And he fled, the bludger trailing a few feet behind him, and then glaring back at Malfoy in hatred. He saw it, the golden snitch. It was hovering inches above Malfoy's left ear, and Malfoy, busy laughing at Harry, hadn't seen it. For an agonizing moment, Harry hung in midair, not daring to speed towards Malfoy in case he looked up and saw the snitch. Wham! He had stayed a second too long. The bludger had hit him at last and smashed into his elbow. Harry felt his arm break. Dimly, dazed by the searing pain in his arm, he slid sideways on his rain-drenched broom, one knee still crooked over it, his right arm dangling useless as his side. The bludger came pelting back for a second attack, this time aiming at his face. Harry swerved out of the way, one idea firmly lodged in his numb. Get to Malfoy. Through a haze of rain and pain, he dived for the shimmering, sneering face below him and saw his eyes widen with fear. Malfoy thought Harry was attacking him. What the? He gasped, careening out of Harry's way. Harry took his remaining hand off his broom, made a wild snatch. He felt his fingers close on the cold snitch, but it was now only gripping the broom with his legs. And there was a yell from the crowd below as he headed straight for the ground, trying hard not to pass out. With a splattering thud, he hit the mud and rolled off his broom. His arm was hanging at a very strange angle, riddled with pain. He heard, as though from a distance, a good deal of whistling and shouting. He focused on the snitch, clutched in his good hand. "Ah," he said vaguely. "We've won." And he fainted. He came around, rain falling on his face, still lying on the field with someone leaning over him. He saw a glitter of teeth. "Oh no, not you." "Doesn't know what he's saying," said Lockhart loudly to the anxious crowd of Gryffindors pressing around them. "Not to worry, Harry. I'm about to fix your arm." "No," said Harry. "I'll keep it like this, thanks." He tried to sit up, but the pain was terrible. He heard a familiar clicking noise nearby. "I don't want a photo of this, Colin," he said loudly. "Lie back, Harry," said Lockhart soothingly. "It's a simple charm I've used countless times." "Why can't I just go to the hospital wing?" said Harry through clenched teeth. "He should, really, Professor," said Muddy Wood, who couldn't help grinning even though the seeker was injured. "Great capture, Harry. Really spectacular. Your best, I'd say." Through the thicket of legs around him, Harry spotted Fred and George Weasley wrestling the rogue bludger into a box. It was still putting up a terrific fight. "Stand back," said Lockhart, who was rolling up his jade green sleeves. "No, don't," said Harry weakly. But Lockhart was twirling his wand, and a second later it had directed straight at Harry's arm. A strange and unpleasant sensation started at Harry's shoulder and spread all the way down to his fingertips. It felt as though his arm was being deflated. He didn't dare look at what had happened. He had shut his eyes. His face turned away from his arm, but his worst fears were realized as the people above him gasped and Colin Creevey began clicking away madly. His arm didn't hurt anymore, nor did it feel remotely like an arm. "Ah," said Lockhart. "Well, yes, that can happen sometimes, but the point is the bones are no longer broken. That's the thing to bear in mind. So, Harry, just toddle up to the hospital wing. Mr. Weasley, Miss Granger, would you escort him? And Madame Pomfrey will be able to, tidy up a bit." As Harry got to his feet, he felt strangely lopsided. Taking a deep breath, he looked down at his right side. What he saw nearly made him pass out again. Poking out of the end of his robes was what looked like a thick, flesh-colored rubber glove. He tried to move his fingers. Nothing happened. Lockhart hadn't mended Harry's bones. He had removed them. Madame Pomfrey wasn't at all pleased. "You should have come straight to me," she raged, holding up the sad, limp remainder of what half an hour before had been a working arm. "I can mend bones in a second, but growing them back—" "You will be able to, won't you?" said Harry desperately. "I'll be able to, certainly, but it will be painful," said Madame Pomfrey grimly, throwing Harry a pair of pajamas. "You'll have to stay the night." Hermione waited outside the curtain drawn around Harry's bed while Ron helped him into his pajamas. It took a while to stuff the rubbery, boneless arm into his sleeve. "How can you stick up for Lockhart now, Hermione?" Ron called through a curtain as he pulled Harry's limp fingers through the cuff. "If Harry hadn't wanted to boning, he would have asked." "Anyone can make a mistake," said Hermione, "and it doesn't hurt anymore, does it, Harry?" "No," said Harry, getting into bed, "but it doesn't do anything else either." As he swung himself onto the bed, arm flapped pointlessly, Hermione and Madame Pomfrey came around the curtain. Madame Pomfrey was holding a large bottle of something called Skelegro. "You're in for a rough night," she said, pouring out a steaming beakerful and handing it to him. "Regrowing bones is a nasty business." She was taking the Skelegro. It burned Harry's mouth and throat as it went down, making him cough and splutter. still tut-tutting about dangerous sports and inept teachers. Madame Pomfrey retreated, leaving Ron and Hermione to help Harry gulp down some water. "We won, though," said Ron, a grin breaking across his face. "That was some catch you made, Harry." Malfoy's face, he looked ready to kill. "I want to know how he fixed that bludger," said Hermione darkly. "We can add that to the list of questions we'll ask him when we've taken the Polyjuice potion," said Harry, sinking back onto his pillows. "I hope it tastes better than this stuff." "If it's got bits of Slytherins in it, you gotta be joking," said Ron. The door to the hospital wing burst open at that moment. Filthy and soaking wet, the rest of the Gryffindor team had arrived to see Harry. "Unbelievable flying, Harry," said George. "I've just seen Marcus Flint yelling at Malfoy. Something about having the snitch on top of his head and not noticing." Malfoy didn't seem too happy. They had brought cakes, sweets, and bottles of pumpkin juice. They had gathered around Harry's bed and were just getting started on what promised to be a good party when Madame Pomfrey came storming over, shouting, "This boy needs his rest. He's got 33 bones to regrow. Out! Out!" And Harry was left alone, with nothing to distract him from the stabbing pains in his limp arm. Hours and hours later, Harry woke quite suddenly in the pitch blackness and gave a small yelp of pain. His arm now felt full of large splinters. For a second, he thought that was what had woken him. Then, with a thrill of horror, he realized that somebody was sponging his forehead in the dark. "Get off," he said loudly, and then, "Dobby?" The house elf's goggling tennis ball eyes were peering at Harry through the darkness. A single tear was running down his large pointed nose. "Harry Potter came back to school," he whispered miserably. "Dobby warned and warned Harry Potter." "Ah, sir, why did you not heed Dobby? Why didn't Harry Potter go back home when he missed the train?" Harry heaved himself up onto his pillows and pushed Dobby's sponge away. "What are you doing here?" he said. "And how did you know I missed the train?" Dobby's lip trembled, and Harry was seized by a sudden suspicion. "It was you," he said slowly. "You stopped the barrier from letting us through." "Indeed, yes," said Dobby, nodding his head vigorously, ears flapping. "Dobby hid and watched for Harry Potter and sealed the gateway, and Dobby had to iron his hands afterwards." He showed Harry 10 long fingers, bandaged fingers. "But Dobby didn't care, sir, for he thought Harry Potter was safe, and never did Dobby dream that Harry Potter would get to school another way." He was rocking backwards and forwards, shaking his ugly head. "Dobby was so shocked when he heard Harry Potter was back at Hogwarts. He let his master's dinner burn. Such a flogging Dobby never had, sir." Harry slumped back onto his pillows. "You nearly got Ron and me expelled," he said fiercely. "You better get lost before my bones come back, Dobby, or I might strangle you." Dobby smiled weakly. "Dobby is used to death threats, sir. Dobby gets them 5 times a day at home." He blew his nose on a corner of the filthy pillowcase he wore, looking so pathetic that Harry felt his anger ebb away in spite of himself. "Why do you wear that thing, Dobby?" he asked curiously. "This, sir?" said Dobby, plucking at the pillowcase. "This is the mark of the house elf's enslavement, sir. Dobby can only be freed if his masters present him with clothes, sir. The family is careful not to pass Dobby even a sock, sir, for then he would be free to leave their house forever." Dobby mopped his bulging eyes and said suddenly, "Harry Potter must go home. Dobby thought his bludger would be enough to make—" "Your bludger," said Harry, anger rising once more. "What do you mean, your bludger? You made that bludger try and kill me?" "Not kill you, sir, never kill you," said Dobby, shocked. "Dobby wants to save Harry Potter's life. Better sent home grievously injured than remain here, sir. Dobby only wanted Harry Potter hurt enough to be sent home." "Oh, is that all?" said Harry angrily. "I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you wanted me sent home in pieces." "Oh, if Harry Potter only know," Dobby groaned, more tears dripping onto his ragged pillowcase. "If he know what he means to us, the lowly, the enslaved, we dregs of the magical world. Dobby remembers how it was when he who must not be named was at the height of his powers, sir. We house elves were treated like vermin, sir." "Of course Dobby is still treated like that, sir," he admitted, drying his face on the pillowcase. "But mostly, sir, life has improved for my kind since you triumphed over he who must not be named. Harry Potter survived, and the Dark Lord's power was broken. And it was near dawn, sir, and Harry Potter shone like a beacon of hope for those of us who thought the dark days would never end, sir. And now at Hogwarts, terrible things are to happen, and perhaps happening already, and Dobby cannot let Harry Potter stay here now that history is to repeat itself. now that the Chamber of Secrets is open once more." Dobby froze, horror-struck, then grabbed Harry's water jug from his bedside table and cracked it over his own head, toppling out of sight. A second later, he crawled back onto the bed, cross-eyed, muttering, "Bad Dobby, very bad Dobby." "So there is a Chamber of Secrets," Harry whispered. "And did you say it's been opened before? Tell me, Dobby." He seized the elf's bony wrist as Dobby's hand inched towards the water jug. "But I'm not Muggle-born. How can I be in danger from the chamber?" "Ah, sir, ask no more, oh, poor Dobby," stammered the elf, his eyes huge in the dark. "Dark deeds are planned in this place, but Harry Potter must not be here when they happen. Go home, Harry Potter, go home. Harry Potter must not meddle in this, sir. It's too dangerous." "Who is it, Dobby?" Harry said, keeping a firm hold on Dobby's wrist to stop him from hitting himself with the water jug again. "Who's opened it? Who opened it last time?" "Dobby can't, sir, Dobby can't. Dobby mustn't tell," squeaked the elf. "Go home, Harry Potter, go home." "I'm not going anywhere," said Harry fiercely. "One of my best friends is Muggle-born. She'll be first in line if the chamber really has been opened." "Harry Potter risk his own life for his friends," moaned Dobby in a kind of miserable ecstasy. "So noble, so valiant, but he must save himself. He must. Harry Potter must not." Dobby suddenly froze, his bat ears quivering. Harry heard it too. There were footsteps coming down the passageway outside. "Dobby must go," breathed the elf, terrified. There was a loud crack, and Harry's fist was suddenly clenched on thin air. He slumped back into bed, his eyes on the dark doorway to the hospital as the footsteps grew nearer. Next moment, Dumbledore was backing into the dormitory, wearing a long woolly dressing gown and a nightcap. He was carrying on one end looked like a statue. Professor McGonagall appeared a second later, carrying its feet. Together they heaved it onto a bed. "Get Madame Pomfrey," whispered Dumbledore, and Professor McGonagall hurried past the end of Harry's bed out of sight. Harry lay quite still, pretending to be asleep. He heard urgent voices, and then Professor McGonagall swept back into view, closely followed by Madame Pomfrey, who was pulling a cardigan on over her nightdress. He heard a sharp intake of breath. "What happened?" Madame Pomfrey whispered to Dumbledore, bending over the statue on the bed. "Another attack," said Dumbledore. "Minerva found him on the stairs." "There was a bunch of grapes next to him," said Professor McGonagall. "We think he was trying to sneak up here to visit Potter." Harry's stomach gave a horrible lurch. Slowly and carefully, he raised himself a few inches so he could look at the statue on the bed. A ray of moonlight lay across its staring face. It was Colin Creevey. His eyes were wide, and his hands were stuck up in front of him, holding his camera. "Petrified," whispered Madame Pomfrey. "Yes," said Professor McGonagall. "But I shudder to think if Albus hadn't been on the way downstairs for hot chocolate, who knows what might have." The three of them stared down at Colin. Then Dumbledore leaned forward and wrenched the camera off Colin's rigid grip. "You don't think he managed to get a picture of his attacker?" said Professor McGonagall eagerly. Dumbledore didn't answer. He opened up the back of the camera. "Good gracious," said Madame Pomfrey. A jet of steam had hissed out of the camera. Harry, 3 beds away, caught the acrid smell of burnt plastic. "Melted," said Madame Pomfrey wonderingly. "All melted." "What does this mean, Albus?" Professor McGonagall asked urgently. "It means," said Dumbledore, "that the Chamber of Secrets is indeed open again." Madame Pomfrey clapped a hand to her mouth. Professor McGonagall stared at Dumbledore. "But Albus, surely, who?" "The question is not who," said Dumbledore, his eyes on Colin. "The question is how." And from what Harry could see of Professor McGonagall's shadowy face, she didn't understand this any better than he did. All right, that's where we're going to stop today. We will start back up at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Hope you'll join us then. Have a wonderful Monday.